Hello, welcome to our webinar today on Lagoon Ammonia compliance, land application versus Lagoon Upgrade. Thanks for attending. Hope you get something out of it. So today we're going to do a basic agenda, a brief introduction into Triplepoint, as we kind of standardly do for you, those of you who've been on our webinars in the past, an introduction to land application, looking at some of the pros and cons of land application, and then how we can potentially optimize it, and then comparing that to potentially upgrading your lagoon system. So the general thought process behind this presentation is, that a lot of lagoons are having to meet new nutrient requirements for either ammonia or nitrogen in general. Looking at land application as an option and comparing that to maybe a lagoon upgrade option instead. So first, Triplepoint, for those of you who are not familiar with us, we have this belief that lagoons do it better. And, we understand this is not the most popular or conventional wisdom that's out there. A lot of the engineering community and other folks, even the regulatory community, have thought that lagoons are kind of old technology and eventually will be obsolete and replaced by more mechanical type processes. And we really feel that, and what we're trying to prove, and I think what we have proven and will continue to do so, is that lagoons are the most cost effective from a capital cost point of view, but also from an operations cost point of view, and are ultimately the best solution for a lot of the communities that they serve, in that they're very easy to operate. And so, in addition to that, I think most people, regardless of what you thought about lagoons are, would agree with those facts. But in addition to that, and this is kind of our mission, which is that a properly designed and operated lagoon system can meet any nutrient or treatment requirement that's out there, and can do so, I think, on a more consistent and potentially low-cost way of actually meeting these limits. So we've got systems in the field, for example, that are putting out single-digit BOD, TSS, and non-detect ammonia. And so, this can be done with the proper equipment, and so we've really dedicated our company to focusing on this mission. And in that, we've come up with a suite of solutions to common lagoon problems. So we started out with our lagoon aeration system, the Mars system, which I'll talk a little bit about that in this presentation later on, as it relates to optimizing for land application. Then we developed our Nitrox system for helping to upgrade a lagoon to meet an ammonia requirement cost effectively in a small footprint system. Talk a little bit about that as well. Our Nitrox Plus D system, which is designed for denitrification, to try and hit a total nitrogen limit, and then ultimately our phosphorus filtration system as well. So we really feel with the tools that we're able to bring to the table, that we can meet any lagoon nutrient requirement that might be out there. So that's what we've done. So in this vein as well, in terms of our mission, we really we try to educate as much as we can, and we feel that, through education, through our blogs and the videos that we do, the training events, including this webinar, and even a Facebook community where we're connecting operators with operators, that we're able to promote this concept that lagoons can do it better. And even if it's not something that we get consulted on, we really want to see lagoons continue to be a valid and truly valid operational strategy for treating wastewater for the communities that have them. If you go to our website, tpemv.com/LDIB, we do give away swag. We've got our camel hat, and obviously our newest addition is the poop emoji, which I got a lot of flack here at the office prior to WEFTEC for buying a poop emoji, buying these poop emojis as giveaways. In fact, they gave me flack saying that, why did you order a box of poop? And when we got to WEFTEC, it was by far and away the most popular giveaway we had. And they're the highest demand thing that we give away at any trade show today. So we will send you a poop emoji as well if you would like. So now to the topic at hand. a lagoon ammonia compliance, and this could also apply to, I think, nitrogen as well. And as far as if you're trying to meet a lagoon total nitrogen limit, you have to also deal with the ammonia. Lagoons struggle with these discharge limitations for a variety of reasons, actually. But I'd say that the main one that comes that people see and comes up quite a bit is to do with temperature. So if you look at this graph here, this is actually a facility that we did an upgrade on. This is prior to the upgrade, showing their lagoon ammonia discharge versus the ambient temperatures for 2 years. So as you can see here, when the temperatures dip, the green line there, the ammonia spikes. And then when the temperatures get high, the ammonia drops. And in some cases here, you can see that, that red line, which is their new permit for ammonia, there were some times in which they were getting mighty close to hitting those limits, without any additional infrastructure to treat the ammonia. But the winter conditions and the cold weather really hamper that ammonia treatment. And I've seen this happen obviously up north, in states like Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri, where we do a lot of work. And then, I've also seen this true of being down south, states like Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, where we're seeing some of these limits come into play. So this is pretty universal across the continuum. And of course, the main reason behind it is that lagoons were never designed to treat the nutrients, like ammonia, nitrogen, or phosphorus. It's just not part of the contemplation. They're really designed for BOD removal. And so the question is, when you get these limits, what to do, and you really have three options. And this is what we see with the engineers we work with. They're really considering the, land application is one of them, the mechanical plant conversion, and then maybe a lagoon retrofit. And so we've always, in previous presentations, dealt with that mechanical plant conversion and lagoon retrofit focus, and we thought, well, maybe it's time to do a presentation on land application as well, because I actually have some personal experience working for a company that designed lagoon land application systems and also operated lagoon land application systems. So I felt like I could bring some experience to the table to give everyone some food for thought. So obviously with the mechanical plant conversion, I only touch on this briefly, the advantages are that, certainly mechanical plants have been treating ammonia for a long time. You're able to increase your treatment capacity within a very small footprint. So for some municipalities where they're growing quickly in population growth, and they're going to quickly exceed the capacity of their existing lagoon system, then maybe a mechanical plant conversion would be an option for them. The downsides are that it's a high capital cost. It tends to be on average maybe 30 to 40% higher capital cost versus retrofitting the existing lagoon conservatively. There's a huge increase in operational complexity for a mechanical plant versus a typical lagoon system. So to give you an example of how this can be an issue, the state of Idaho about 10 years ago decided that they didn't like lagoons anymore and that they were going to try and push people towards mechanical plants. And so they got about 5 years into this program of trying to push owners towards mechanical plants, put some of these plants into place, and we're actually finding that the effluent quality got worse out of the mechanical plant versus what they were seeing before with the lagoon, and sort of asking themselves questions of what's going on here, and a deeper look into this, they were finding that both were, the owners and the operators of these systems were not adequately trained to understand how they worked and how to optimize them, number one, but they were also finding that there was a huge aversion to the power costs that they were seeing by operating the plant itself, and there was this sort of drive to try to push back on the power costs as much as possible. And I mean, as a result of that, Idaho's really taken a step back from their original approach and thought, well, maybe lagoons aren't so bad. In fact, we did a project with CH2ML was the engineer on it. Obviously, Jacobs now for the Eagle Sewer District in Boise, Idaho, outside of Boise, Idaho, and they looked at a 20-year plan, a 20-year view of, okay, well, what should the Eagle Sanitary District do? And they came to the conclusion that they were going to keep their lagoon and upgrade their lagoon and have a multi-phased approach to expanding the capacity of their existing lagoon while meeting all the current limits. So I think we're making headway with kind of, this approach, and that maybe mechanical plants, and I'm not saying in every instance or in every application mechanical plant makes no sense. There are certainly applications in which it does. But in a lot of instances, certainly it seems to be the case. We seem to make a headway. So land application. I'm going to talk about the lagoon retrofit at the end and kind of compare it to land application, but for now, we'll talk about land application. So obviously, with land application, you're taking the effluent from your lagoon and you're applying it on a field or some kind of growing crop. There's two main types, a slow rate and a subsurface drip, and I'll touch on both of those. And that's fairly simplistic. There's lots of different ways to do land application, but I'm just going to deal with those two in this presentation. They seem to be the more common types that I see. And typically, this land application is restricted by whether the amount of water per acre or the amount of pounds per acre that you can apply the effluent based on the nutrient load in the water itself. So I'll talk a little bit more detail about the restrictions and what they need, but that's just sort of a general overview. So the benefit of land application is you essentially eliminate your discharge permit because you're not discharging. So lots of times they call them the zero discharge systems. And so you're not worried about ammonia levels per se, or total nitrogen or total phosphorus levels, especially in municipal systems. They generally, you're not as worried about those things. You're not worried about your lagoon trying to do something it really, at this point, really can't do if you don't have the right equipment in place. So by applying it on this, taking it, you eliminate the discharge permit and you're applying it on a field. And when you do that, any nutrients that may be in there, in the water, and there's usually some residual nutrients and phosphorus and ammonia and stuff like that, can be taken up by the growing crop, right? So that's advantageous for the field because, those are taken up by a plant that can use those nutrients, which means less fertilizer is necessary. And if less fertilizer is necessary, obviously it's green. The manufacturing of fertilizer is also quite a nasty process, and maybe isn't the most green process that's out there. So you're saving on fertilizer, and then you're also saving on the fresh water that you would otherwise use to irrigate. So a lot of good advantages ecologically to doing it. And then instead of those nutrients, now that they're being taken up by the growing crop, they're not being discharged. And so, for example, if you were to take your lagoon and upgrade for an ammonia limit, you'd be in that process, you can meet your ammonia limit, but you'd be going from having ammonia going into the stream to having lots of nitrate go into the stream, because what we do is we convert the ammonia into nitrate, right? So the nitrate itself is not as bad for the amphibious life like the ammonia is, but it's still a nutrient and it still causes eutrophication and some of these things that we see. And so by land applying it, you're circumventing that whole cycle, right? You're putting the nutrient on the field. It's being taken up by the growing crop, and therefore it's not, quote unquote, polluting the receiving stream in any way, assuming it doesn't run off the field. Eventually, this water that you land apply can percolate down through the soil and recharge aquifers, which is obviously a huge benefit, especially out west where we're seeing a quick depletion in the aquifers that's leading to the point where they're really just going to run out of water. So that's certainly a benefit too. And then ultimately, a land application system is sort of a low-skill operation system. Obviously you got the lagoon. Lagoons are really easy to maintain. That's commonly known. Well, when it comes to land application system, I'll get into kind of what that entails, but most people who are operators, who are hands-on people, can operate the system. It doesn't require any specific level of thinking. It's more practical versus versus intellectual, as maybe a mechanical plant sometimes could be a little bit more intellectual. And so it does tend to be a pretty easy system to maintain in terms of what needs to be done to keep it running. So, two main types that we see, and I'd say the vast majority of land app systems are what we call flow rate. And so that's where you're spraying the water across the surface of a field of some kind. And so, most common method, and it works in most soils. The rate of application depends on the soil conditions, and I'll touch on that in a minute. But it's easy to maintain because you've got all your pipes on top of the ground. So you get a leak somewhere, you get a clog somewhere, you can see it, and you can touch it, you can feel it. So that's why it tends to be the most go-to approach. But the other approach I see more and more over the years is what's called the drip irrigation approach, which is where you have a buried irrigation system that has basically this tubing that's got these little drip applicators within it. And you're pushing water down the line, and they're dripping water. And so the benefit of a subsurface system is that you can irrigate for longer, which means your application area can be smaller because it's subsurface. It's not subject to freezing as much. When it's working, from what I've seen, when it's working and working well, it's out of sight, out of mind kind of scenario. Now, typically it requires some filtration ahead of getting into the drip system. Obviously, if you had lots of particles in your wastewater, then you'd be clogging up those applicators that are built into the tube. But it's becoming more popular because it is out of sight, out of mind, and you can push water through it for longer, and it can be an easier way to get to irrigate. So to the disadvantages. Disadvantages, I would say, of land application are just due to the restrictions that are associated with when and how long and so forth that you can apply water on land. So in a lot of states, first thing you're going to do is look at the soil conditions of the application field. And this is especially true of a drip system, but certainly of a flow rate system as well. So, you need to take soil borings across the field that you're proposing to land apply. And based on those soil borings, you can apply more or less. Or maybe it rules out the possibility of land application at all. So, for example, if you have particularly clay soil, it can be dense enough where it's kind of impermeable, and it prevents water. If it's too close to the surface, it just prevents water from effectively being taken into the ground, and ultimately can lead to more runoff, which means you have to either slow your rate of land application down quite a bit, or maybe you can't do it at all. On the flip side of that, if you have more sandy soil, sometimes that is not ideal. Now, I'm not super familiar with the different restrictions around soil conditions. I just know it's a really, really big point and can lead to major issues if you have, like, for example, unrepresentative soil borings across a field can lead to certain areas of that field being constantly waterlogged, which is a big no-no in land application. Typically, water that's used for reclaimed water that's used for land application purposes cannot be put on edible crops. So, what I see is if you had you see a lot of golf courses where they put land apply, which is a good use for land application because obviously grass is not an edible crop. We've also seen, cotton fields, which are really good for that. Or even hay, fields are really good. So a lot of folks that I see doing land application will apply it onto a hay field, and then once a year they'll get a farmer in. He'll, cut down all the hay and bale it up and take it away, and they just call it quits. They don't sell the hay to them. They just want them to take it off their land, kind of thing, which can be a good arrangement. But you generally can use it on food crops. You can't apply within 24 hours of a rain event. So the big thing with this, I think, that's disadvantageous, and it goes back to my experience working for a firm that operated land application systems, was, you had to be constantly looking at the weather. The operators did. If it was going to rain, or if it started raining and you were applying, you had to shut the system off. It makes it a lot harder and more operator intensive when you're always having to look at the weather and paying attention to what's going on outside to see whether you can utilize the land application system or not. There are only certain times a year, a certain specified number of days that you can typically land apply. So in Illinois, for example, where we're based, it's 156 days a year. So you've got 156 days to get rid of a year's worth of effluent that you're now storing in the storage lagoon. And sometimes, you get to the end of the year, I see this a lot, where they get to the end of the year and they're like, wow, we got to get rid of 2 million gallons of water, and so therefore we got to apply over the course of the next 2 weeks X many gallons, and we got to get rolling here, and hope that it doesn't rain, and so that really poses a challenge for operators, which I think makes it harder to apply a land, to operate a land application system. And sometimes what people don't realize are the kind of how much you got to be on your game and paying attention to the numbers and making sure that you get rid of the water. Land application is limited to a certain number of pounds of day of nutrient on the land per acre, typically. And a lot of municipal systems, this isn't a big deal, but industrial systems where they have quite a bit of nutrient in their wastewater with their land applying, that's a big deal. They're constantly having to make sure they're not over applying a certain number of pounds to the field. And when you operate a land application system, a lot of times you have to own the land in which you're land applying. Certainly for industrial systems, I've seen this, but municipal systems too, that simply having a long-term lease for the DNRs of the world and the DEQs and the EPAs is not good enough, because there was something to go wrong with that lease, you'd have nowhere to get rid of your effluent. And so that's obviously a huge concern and something that, they're trying to avoid. So oftentimes you have to buy the land, and it can be kind of expensive to do that. And then finally, typically irrigation areas need to be fenced in and/or have buffering from human contact. So that's additional land that you got to set aside that you can't land apply on, but costs money to apply, to use land application. So when you go back to the fields that you do need there's pretty high land requirements. So first, on the one level at the lagoons, you can see here, you have that big storage lagoon in that picture on the top left there. And so you've got to be able to store whatever water that you're discharging or that you're finished working with over the winter months, and then draw down on that storage lagoon over the summer and fall months, spring, summer, and fall months to get rid of the water. So that storage lagoon can be fairly big depending on your flow rate. And then on top of that, obviously, you got to buy the land to land apply on a lot of times. So it's quite land intensive in that respect, which for some lagoon systems is fine. That's just, they're in a rural area. It's, they got a farm fields all around them, but it still constitutes cost and certainly something that needs to be considered. I touched on this earlier, the operational challenges. I think that's one of the main disadvantages that a lot of folks don't realize is, while it's, definitely fairly low skill to operate a land application system, there's still maintenance. You've got a huge irrigation system you've got to maintain. You've got pumps, you've got center pivot rigs or different irrigation systems that are out there that can get clogged. For example, one of the systems that my former company used to operate had a center pivot rig, And the track would always have some issue with the track, like the track, the wheels would go flat, or there'd be a divot somewhere, and they're having to constantly maintain this track to make sure the thing can go back and forth and it doesn't get stuck in one spot, where of course when it irrigates in one spot, it's going to get waterlogged right there. So it's certainly not a no maintenance system. And then that on top of, making sure that you're planning when you're going to get rid of the water, and making sure you're not running into rain events, or inspecting the fields to make sure that they're not waterlogged at any point. All these things make it more operator intensive than perhaps some might initially think. And then when you've got this storage lagoon full of treated effluent, what we've seen quite a bit is that these storage lagoons tend to have a lot of algae in them. Stagnant water that's just sitting there in a lagoon, and we all know lagoons grow algae, and that's just part of the game. And so, this algae, sometimes it can be not an issue, and other times it can be a bit of a problem, because it can clog irrigation heads and cause issues with the irrigation system that you might not know. And then obviously it can also cause foul odors within the system itself. So it's a concern. It's something that comes up. It's true of any lagoon, but certainly a storage lagoon will have issues potentially with odors and algae. I think it's my final disadvantage, not to go too heavy on the disadvantages, but you can get some issues with nitrate seepage. So this facility here that I got pictured is Bishop, California. Now, Bishop, California is up in the east part of California and near the Sierra Mountains. Beautiful, just absolutely beautiful location. One of those picturesque lagoon systems that we've worked on, one of the most picturesque, I'd say. And so they land apply on surrounding fields, and what they found is, because the aquifers underneath their fields where they're land applying are owned by LA County. So all that water is then pumped from those aquifers all the way to LA. It's not a short distance. And they have monitoring wells on this site to constantly be monitoring the water quality that's down in those wells, and down in those aquifers. And they find that at times they have elevated levels of nitrate. What's interesting is that the city of Bishop does not treat for ammonia. So when it comes into their plant, it's 30 milligrams per liter. When it goes out of their plant, it's roughly 30 milligrams per liter ammonia. And the nitrates are pretty low. But what happens is they land apply, and when that water, that ammonia water, hits the soil, it actually nitrifies in the soil and converts it into nitrate right there. And then it's just seeping down into the groundwater, and leaves these elevated levels of nitrate in their monitoring wells. So in this instance, they're actually looking at, well, what are we going to do? How do we get rid of this nitrate? And it looks like what they're going to have to do is both nitrify and denitrify, so that their total nitrogen that they're land applying is less. So in this instance, and this is a special instance, if you're in the Midwest, there's a lot of places this doesn't apply. Most places I'd say this doesn't apply, but in Bishop, California, it seems to be one of these peculiar instances where land application doesn't really get them away from a nutrient limit. Now, why are nitrates an issue? Well, nitrates are an issue because they can cause what's called blue baby syndrome. And that is where, they form compounds in the human body, and particularly in babies, that change hemoglobin into methoglobin and decrease the ability for the blood to carry oxygen, which turns babies blue. So obviously LA County doesn't want that. Typically, the limit on that is about 10 milligrams per liter or so. It's kind of a typical drinking water limit, but it's not a good thing. So if you're going to do land application and, you check these boxes and this is the best way to go, how do you optimize it? So we've done some research on this, and look, we believe lagoons do it better. So if you have a lagoon system, regardless of whether you're doing land application or you're going to put in an upgrade, we want to help lagoons to do it the best possible way they can. And so we ran across this study that was published in the Journal for Irrigation and Drainage Engineering, and it was study done on Littlefield, Texas, that has an aerated lagoon system followed by land application. And the upshot of it is, what they found was it was not able, it was able to exceed the requirements of any other discharge requirements of any other lagoon system that they looked at with this approach. And so it seemed like it was a very cost-effective. Their conclusion was a very cost-effective and good way to treat the wastewater. So the aeration itself, that when you aerate a lagoon system, you're reducing the amount of BOD, you're reducing the amount of TSS, right? And you're ultimately, potentially in the right weather conditions, also reducing the amount of ammonia. And so the BOD and TSS by itself really help to help out the irrigation system, because there's just less solids in the system. There's less things that can clog the effluent, and just makes for a more sure operation. But it also, if there is any runoff into a ditch or a stream that might come on the field, it's obviously a lot cleaner water to begin with. So what they saw was improved BOD, TSS treatment, 92 to 100% on those metrics. No potential for groundwater contamination, lower maintenance across the system, and no odor. And that's obviously a big thing with putting aeration in, so you get to mitigate those odors. So just going to touch briefly on aeration and our aeration system in particular. But, aeration has a lot of benefits for any manner of wastewater treatment, but certainly in lagoons. And so we look at aeration as a combination of two things. First of all, adding oxygen to water for the metabolizing microorganisms. Second of all, creating mixing so that those organisms can come into contact with the oxygen, the food as well. Bringing those three aspects together creates the best type of aeration you can get, and ultimately increases the level of treatment that you see. So especially in a lagoon, which tends to be a really, really big body of water that's not as easily mixed as an aeration basin, a concrete basin. So we developed our Mars aeration system that has utilized coarse bubble mixing through a static tube, fine bubble aeration through EPDM fine bubble membranes, and one portable platform. So it's totally portable, can be installed from the surface and dropped down to the bottom. What happens when our system puts foot in place by combining this coarse bubble static tube in the center of the unit? You can see from this CFD model, what we do is we create a mild airlift effect where we're pulling water from around the unit, pulling it through that central column and pushing it towards the surface. So we're creating the circulation and mixing, which both helps to ultimately circulate water and spread the oxygen around the lagoon, but also helps to mix and turbulate it, so we're getting the food, the oxygen, the bug together. And so that's what kind of makes our aeration system a lot different, the lagoon aeration system a lot different from the alternatives that are out there. This kind of gives you a side view kind of our CFD modeling that we've done on the unit that shows you how it all just kind of erupts into this top layer and has this maximum affection area throughout the whole entire system by creating this mixing. So this really does provide a lot of advantages. Even if you have a land application system, we've done a lot of projects where we're even just putting aeration into the storage lagoon can helps the storage lagoon to perform better, but and so you're not getting as much algae growth in there. You're getting lower BOD and TSS on the effluent. That's leading to better performance of the land application system overall. And it's really easy. It's really quick to install. It operates very efficiently because we're using fine bubble. It's very efficient oxygen transfer, and ultimately just helps the whole process across the board. So if you are thinking about optimizing an application, aeration is a great way to do it. So this final section of my presentation, I'm going to look at comparing land application to a lagoon upgrade. The benefit of a Lagoon Upgrade, and this is a good thing that it seems to be something more and more that engineers are looking at as an option. It's one of those three alternatives we talked about at the beginning. The benefits are you're utilizing that existing infrastructure, right? So, the lagoon, for example, has never had an issue treating BOD and TSS year-round, regardless of the weather conditions. So utilize that infrastructure rather than replacing it. It's very low maintenance. It's easy to operate. The operator knows how to operate the system, presumably, and so forth. But with our approach, what we do is we add a nitrification system near the back end of the plant in order to accomplish that ammonia compliance that we need. And if we need to, we can also put denitrification into the mix in order to accomplish low total nitrogen limits as well, or certainly under 10 with the denitrification system. So we're utilizing the existing infrastructure, then we're putting in small footprint reactors that can accomplish the task of bringing the ammonia and the total nitrogen down if necessary, and do so in a very cost-effective manner, maybe at half the cost or a third of the cost of upgrading to a mechanical plant, just replacing the whole lagoon. So nitrification. Nitrification is sort of the most common method in municipal wastewater treatment of getting rid of the ammonia. And really it's the process of just growing a certain type of bacteria in order to convert ammonia first to nitrite and then finally into nitrate, right? So we're just taking, what we're really doing in this process is we're taking ammonia in one form, nitrogen in one form, that is ammonia. Then we're converting it into nitrate. And so we don't necessarily, unless we put denitrification into the process as well, which we can do, we don't necessarily get rid of the total nitrogen per se. We're just taking ammonia from one form and converting it of nitrogen into another form of nitrogen in terms of nitrate. So that's what total nitrogen is. If we need to, what we can do also is take that nitrate and convert it into nitrogen gas, and that's what we do via the process of denitrification. And when we do that, that's when we take down the total nitrogen levels overall. So how do we do that? We do that by creating the conditions within our reactor system where we can get the nitrification to occur. So what we have to do is we have to select for the nitrifiers within our reactor. And we do that by giving them the optimal or the best conditions possible within the system in order to do their job. So those conditions are, generally speaking, first of all, we need to get the BOD down to 20 or 30 milligrams per liter. And we do that through the lagoons. Lagoons have been treating BOD for a long time, and they can bring them down those levels. We need oxygen. We need 4.6 pounds of oxygen per pound of ammonia, plus another maybe 5 to 6 milligrams per liter of dissolved oxygen in cold conditions in which to get the nitrification to occur. We need to create complete mix conditions. The reason for that, again, it goes back to the purpose of aeration. We need to get the bugs, the food, and the oxygen together, and the mixing is what does that. And so if we want to do it in a very small footprint reactor system, we need to have complete mix. pH, typically this is not an issue too much in municipal systems, but we utilize the alkalinity that's within the water naturally to feed the nitrifiers. If you don't have that alkalinity in your water naturally, we need to add that alkalinity in rare circumstances municipally, but certainly industrially we use alkalinity quite a bit more in nitrification, but we got to have that. Temperature, we need about 41 degrees F, and then we need to grow the bugs themselves. We need to give the bugs a place to live, which is what we use in terms of substrate. So this is our Nitrox process. We use like the two lagoons, one or two lagoons ahead of the reactors themselves to treat the BOD. Then we pull out of the secondary lagoon through the two-stage nitrification reactors into a polishing cell and out your normal discharge. So within that reactor itself, we provide a substrate for the nitrifiers to grow on, and that's typically through an attached growth media that you can see here. There's many different types of this media out there with lots of different shapes or form, but the principle is the same. The more surface area we provide, the more nitrifiers we can grow, and the more nitrification we can achieve in colder temperatures. And so the benefit of the media is we can maximize the surface area within a really small footprint. So if you look at this, a typical lagoon system, for example, that we measured one time, if you look at the surface area that's just naturally inherent within the lagoon, you've got the lagoon slopes, the lagoon baffle curtains, the lagoon aeration system, the bottom of the lagoon, and so forth. That constitutes about 167,000 square feet of total possible surface area for the nitrifiers to grow, right? Well, you can fit that using this media into about 1/3 of a semi-truck. And the truth is, you probably need that whole semi-truck to do nitrification at cold temperature. So what the media provides, the substrate and the media provides, is a lot of surface area in a very small footprint, which means you can get lots of nitrification within a small reactor system, right, which keeps the capital costs down. Within the reactors, we've got a coarse bubble, or what we call medium bubble aeration grid, which is the stainless steel pipes with holes in it. And so that grid is, you're feeding air from a blower system through that grid. It's creating a complete mixed environment. It's adding the oxygen, it's adding the mixing. And the benefit of it is, A, it's so simple and robust that you don't really have to maintain it. You're not going to plug those coarse bubble holes, those medium bubble holes, they're just too large. And then it helps to keep the media in suspension. So the media is just constantly tumbling around in there, which is really maximizing the opportunity for the food, the oxygen, and the bugs to get together and do their job. So the operational requirements of the system, and I think this is one of the beauties of it, are really simple. You have a blower system. So with a blower system, you have oil changes, air filter replacement, belts, and an occasional rebuild of the blower itself. And other than that, you got to keep flow going through the reactor. You got to keep the air on, and you're done. And so when you compare that to a land application system, you're not looking at the weather. You're not trying to understand when you get rid of the water and when you can't get rid of the water. You're going out there. It's regular. It's predictable. You're going out there once every week. You're checking on the system. You're changing the filter or the air filter or the oil or the belt if you need to, and you're going home. And so it really becomes a really simple system to operate. We have deployed, we have about 6 or 7 installations in the field and another 6 or 7 that are in various stages of either construction or design or bidding. And so we're doing a lot of these projects with this Nitrox system now. It's a very proven system at this stage and can be very effective. You can see here with this system in Missouri that we have these 2 concrete tanks here, quite very small relative to the lagoons itself. So when you compare the operation and maintenance of the 2 systems, obviously with land application, you got the irrigation pumping power costs, you got the irrigation system maintenance costs. With the Lagoon Upgrade, you got the blower power costs, you got the blower maintenance costs. With land application, you have the land application area that you need to maintain. To some extent, it's not maintenance free, it still needs to be maintained. You have the heating electrical costs with the, I didn't touch on that too much with our system, depending on where you're at in the country, you may or may not need that. And then you got water quality testing. So there's just differences in what you have to do. I would think, in my mind, I feel like, operating our system has got to be a lot simpler than operating a land application system. But, it really depends on your situation. So little case study, just to sort of compare the cost of land application versus the cost of Lagoon Upgrade. This is actually taken from a facility plan that an engineering firm wrote that worked with us on a project in Missouri. And so these numbers are my numbers. They're his numbers, and I'm just using them here. This is a 450,000 gallon a day wastewater system, municipal system. It needed, by his calculation, about 27 million gallons of storage for the land application system. And he needed to get rid of 137 million gallons of water each year for when he land applied. So in that case, he needed 126 acres at 40 inches per acre. And just assuming the farmland cost around him of about $5,000 an acre, that's about $700,000 just in land costs. With the Nitrox system, we proposed a 2-cell reactor system. It was about 90,000 gallons of treatment volume, 20 by 20 by 18 foot deep tanks, 40 horsepower reactor blower, and 15 horsepower Lagoon Aeration blower, and maybe about 1 to 2 hours a week of operation time, operator time and attention. So when you do a side-by-side comparison here of the two systems, from an O&M point of view, you can see it was about $462 cost per gallon for the Nitrox reactor, and that's out the door, it's installed cost, and about $593 for the land application system. So this engineer was estimating that the overall capital cost would be about $2 million for the Nitrox system, about $2.6 million for the land application system. And then what was interesting to me is that he found that the operating cost for the land application system was actually going to be higher, which I was quite surprised by. We were for our system, it was looking at $191,000 a year, and this includes labor, power, all in. And then for the land application system, he was doing $229. So he found in this instance that it was going to be a more cost-effective alternative to upgrade the Lagoon. Now, I don't think that this is true of every instance, but I think it's just something that, needs to be looked at carefully when considering what the alternatives are, to see how these things pan out, because sometimes it doesn't pan out quite the way you think it would. So, conclusion. Land application is a great way to, in a very, very environmentally friendly way, to deal with lagoon discharge. It may not be feasible in all circumstances, but if you do it, look at using lagoon aeration to enhance the process and make it better, because we found that it really is something that can make it run smoother and ultimately make it even more environmentally friendly than it is currently. And then in some circumstances, upgrading the lagoon might be the best way to deal with a nutrient limit versus going land application. And I've seen that quite a bit. So just wanted to put that out there. It might actually be lower operation and maintenance costs versus a land app system. So with that, see if we got some time here for some questions. All right. I had a question from Lucas Randall saying, can we put the applied effluent on animal feed crops like corn? I believe so. I believe it depends on the state that you're in as to whether you can put land apply on animal feed crop. But as far as I'm aware, I think that's a fairly acceptable practice. We will put this copy of this presentation online. For those who are interested, we usually post it on YouTube. If there's any other questions, you can feel free to put them in the bar here. I'll wait a few more minutes for anybody else who has any questions. I had a few questions here. Lucas is one. Eric Pettit was another one asking whether we get the presentation. So I said that would go on our YouTube channel. For those of you who want, For those of you who want PDHs, you can feel free to email me or respond to the original email, and we will send you PDH hours for this presentation time. If you have any more questions, feel free to give me a call or shoot me an email. My phone number here on the screen. And, reach out. We'll be happy to help in any way we can. If you are looking at working on a Lagoon project right now, we'd love to take a look at it, at least give you our preliminary evaluation as to what to do. And if there aren't any more questions, which I'm not seeing here in the question bar. Okay, here we go. Got another question. The example you gave for Bishop, California applies to all groundwater. Once nitrate is in there, it is there forever. All users of groundwater in the future will have issues if you allow nitrate to go into the water. Don't you need to address that? Well, my understanding is, and I did this presentation actually at the Missouri Fall Conference in Missouri, and I had a few folks come up to me afterwards and saying that, in their studies and their expertise, some DNR folks actually, some regulators, that they found that nitrate seepage was not an issue in Missouri and not going to be an issue in Missouri. And I'm not sure if they felt that way because of the ability of the crops in Missouri to take up that nitrate, or if it just wasn't going to percolate, or if during the percolation it was going to denitrify. I'm not sure why they said that, I don't recall, but they were sort of seeing that as a misnomer. On the flip side of that, what we're seeing more and more of in California, for example, is that they're having to treat the nitrate before they distribute it in the drinking water system. So as opposed to treating the nitrate on the wastewater side, they're treating the nitrate on the drinking water side at the drinking water plant. Another example of that is the city of Des Moines in Iowa. As far as I understand it, has one of the largest nitrate removal systems of any city for drinking water system. And it's actually quite interesting to me because, Iowa is imposing ammonia treatment standards right now for lagoon systems and for other wastewater plants. And so they're only really increasing the level of nitrates in their receiving streams, and then to pay the money to get them to be removed later. So I don't know. It's sort of a catch-22 because the nitrates, the ammonia itself is toxic to the amphibious life, but the nitrate itself is sort of toxic to humans in a lot of ways. So it's got to be dealt with one way or another. I think if you're going to go ahead and nitrify and denitrify within a lagoon, then you might as well discharge as opposed to land applying, because at that point you will have had really low BOD and TSS anyway, and better overall effluent quality. So it's something that could be coming down the pipe anyway, and I think everybody sees the future of ammonia or lagoon compliance being, we're starting with ammonia here, and we're later going to get on to total nitrogen and probably phosphorus at some point. Which one comes first depends on your state, but definitely something to watch out for, and that's why we're trying to be ahead of the game in terms of having our Nitrox plus D system and our PhosBox system, even though it doesn't seem to be something that comes up that often in terms of we don't sell it that often because most people don't have that compliance requirement right now for total nitrogen and total phosphorus, but we want to be ready for it when they do. So that's my take on it. Thanks for that question, Simon. Any other questions? Okay. Somebody asked, can land application be done effectively from a single cell lagoon system? So I have seen this, and on a very small system that my previous employer had designed. and they actually, instead of having a storage lagoon, they actually float the storage, which is really an interesting concept on top of their treatment volume. So they design with the level of treatment volume they need, and then they design additional volume for storage and all in one lagoon cell. Really what that amounts to is just creating a really long retention time lagoon. And, you know, what I know from lagoon treatment is the longer the retention time, the better the treatment is. And so, yeah, I think it can be done. I think you can do land application from a single cell lagoon system. You just got to make it deep or make it really big, one of the two. And so it's possible. I don't know if every state accepts that approach or not. I know Illinois does because they got it done there. I believe it'll work quite well because you have this huge volume, and as soon as you treated that volume to a certain quality, you know, you've got this massive dilution factor, and that's ultimately good. So I believe it can work. I think it's better in multiple treatment cells. I think it's better with a separate storage cell, but certainly it can be done in small applications in one single cell. Okay. Yes, we can send out a copy of the presentation to all those who are interested. Again, respond to the original email or shoot me an email, and I will be happy to have a copy of the presentation sent to you. And we will also be posting it on our YouTube channel because we did record it. Okay. All right, with that, I think I'm going to wrap. I don't see any other questions here that I can respond to. If you do have any other questions offline on this presentation, do feel free to reach out. Again, my email is, let's see, I'll pull it up for you. Right here on the screen, patrick.hill@tpenv.com. Be happy to help out in any way I can. And thanks for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed it. Sorry, I feel like I dragged on that one, but I hope you found it interesting. And hopefully I'll see you at the next presentation here, which will probably be in about 3 months. All right, thank you. Have a good one. Bye.